exciting to be with you today. This is a historic day because there's going to be a vice presidential debate tonight at 9 o'clock, the last debate of the presidential season, apparently. And what's horrifying, really, as we lead into that, and Cassandra, you just said one of your parents, that your parents hail from Haiti, is what has taken place over the last weeks, which I think is unprecedented. This massive attack on the Haitian community by the Republican vice presidential and presidential candidates, singling out a population in a particular city in Ohio, Springfield, and vilifying them, lying about them. And when the town, many of the politicians there, Republican, said, what you both are saying is not true, instead of backing off, they doubled down. We just had on Democracy Now, Gerline Joseph, who is the head of the Haitian Bridge Alliance. And she, in the last week, filed a criminal complaint against Trump and J.D. Vance, which you can do in Ohio. An individual can file a criminal complaint saying that you have endangered not only the Haitian population of Springfield, but of the United States. And it's so important when something like this happens. And I think this is why you all are so important, all the communities that you represent, is you hear people speaking for themselves. There's nothing more important. The idea that they can, when you have people at the target end of something like this, the most important thing is just to challenge the stereotypes and the caricatures. And I'm going to start with where I come from, Pacifica Radio. In New York, it's WBAI 99.5 FM. But Pacifica started in Berkeley, California, right after World War II. A pacifist named Lou Hill, who was a war resistor, came out of the detention camps after the war and said, there's got to be a media outlet that is not run by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists. And that's how Pacifica was born. KPFA in the Bay Area was the first station in 1949, then KPFK in Los Angeles 10 years later. WBAI, our station, New York, 1960. WPFW in Washington, Jazz and Justice Radio, 1977. 1970, KPFT went on the air in Houston, Texas. Within a few weeks of going on the air, the Ku Klux Klan strapped dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it to smithereens. They got back on their feet. A few weeks later, KPFT went back on the air, and the Klan strapped 15 times the dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it up again, right in the middle of Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant, which I actually think is a good song. But and then it took many months, and in January of 1971, KPFT went back on the air again. This phoenix rose from the ashes. I can't remember if it was the Grand Dragon or the Exalted Cyclops, because I often confuse their titles of the Klan, but he said it was his proudest act. And I think that's because he understood how dangerous Pacifica is, or how dangerous independent media is. Dangerous because it allows people to speak for themselves. So whether it's a Palestinian child or an Israeli grandmother, whether it is a Haitian uncle or an aunt in Afghanistan, when you hear them speaking from their own experience, it challenges the stereotypes and the caricatures that fuel the hate groups. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth, but all too often it's wielded as a weapon of war, which is why we have to take the media back. And I think that's what all of you are doing, either out of necessity or because you just deeply believe that we need to have this global conversation. Now, John said he made a mistake when he, which I'll never forgive you for, calling the book The Silent Majority, but it made me think of, at the time I said, WTF, what? That's the name of his, his blog, whatever. I would never use words like that. So, are you kidding me? Oh my God. Oh my God. Could you imagine the guest of honor writes to the host, WTF is for lunch. Now, I would never do that except that is the name of his blog, and he did not realize the name of his own blog. Okay, I do not talk to people like that. Oh my God. Now, why would my phone correct it to WTF unless I use that term all the time? So it was on purpose. But, okay, this is very embarrassing. Oh my God. Oh gosh. But the reason I didn't want to just point out your error there again and again to hit you over the head with it, but there's a point of calling the book. The book is called The Silenced Majority. Stories of uprisings, occupations, resistance, and hope. And the reason it's called The Silenced Majority, it is a play on the silent majority, but I really do believe that those who care about war and peace, those who care about racial, economic, gender equality, those who care about LGBTQ issues, those who care about hyper-local and global issues, the environment, those who care about all of these different issues are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take the media back, which is exactly what you're doing. And what I'd love to do today is have a conversation with all of you about what you think are the critical issues of the day and how you cover New Jersey, especially, and how you think we should view the issues you take on. And I also hope that whenever you're dealing with big issues, thank you. Whenever you're dealing with issues that you think we might be interested in, if you could send them to stories@democracynow.org with suggestions of guests that we should talk to. We do not believe on having on this small circle of pundits that you get on all the networks. These pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. The media should be this great equalizer. It is an awesome responsibility that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day. War and peace, life and death, and anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society. And really drawing the lessons. I have two cousins right now and their families in Asheville, North Carolina. They are devastated, right? At least 130 people are dead in that whole swath of area. In Georgia, you might have heard it already became obviously a presidential issue because President Trump said that Biden hadn't called the Republican governor of Georgia, Kemp, to offer help. Immediately, the Republican governor of Georgia, Kemp, said, not only did Biden call, but has offered all the help, the federal help that we need. But the bigger issue of climate change and climate catastrophe, the media does very well with their reporters standing in puddles and in lakes and in the middle of a storm. If there isn't one, they'll run the shower but not show the shower head. But all of that should be covered if you're talking about what is driving this. Climate change, the fossil fuel-based economy that we all depend on. And how do we, as the most powerful country on earth, as the country that has relied on fossil fuels and put out those carbon emissions perhaps worse in history than any country on earth, what do we have to do to change our ways? Because those on the front lines can least afford to deal with this, and even in our own country, are often the people most horribly affected or those can least defend themselves. So what are the lessons that we learn? Democracy Now! Goes every year to the UN Climate Summit we have since Copenhagen in 2009. This year it's in Baku, Azerbaijan. In increasingly repressive countries where people cannot protest, or in fossil fuel countries that are, oil kingdoms, where you have the heads of the national oil companies, the head of the UN Climate Summit. It's become just astounding. But it's also a place where thousands of activists come from all over the world, from the hardest hit nations, to explain what is happening to them. And it's those voices. Hello, it's so nice to see you. No, you're not late, don't worry. I'm joking. Hi. Professor Linda always came to Democracy Now! With her classes, and it's always been so wonderful. Together, we lost a very wonderful member of the Democracy Now! Community just in the last few weeks. Her name was Simin Minu Fakande. She is Iranian, German, American. She is our education director. Unfortunately, she died of cancer at the too young age of 61, but she has brought in thousands of students from all over the world over the last 13 years to watch Democracy Now! Every morning, 8 to 9, and then have a discussion with us about how we cover the news. It's been wonderful to get to know you in all the classes that you have brought. Right now, we are living in such serious times. We covered the Republican convention in Milwaukee for the week, and then we went to Chicago for the Democratic convention. Chicago was the hometown of Emmett Till, 14-year-old African-American boy who died in Money, Mississippi on August 28th, 1955. His mother, Mamie, sent him to be in Mississippi with his aunt and uncle to get him out of the city heat, or rather just the city, to be with his cousins. He was ripped out of bed by a white mob. His body was found at the bottom of the Tallahatchie River. And when his body was sent back to Chicago, the undertaker said to Mamie Till, his mother, we're going to keep the casket closed because, the horrendous, he had been tortured and his distended, distorted head, we don't want people to see. And she said, then I will take a hammer to the casket. She demanded it be open. Thousands of people walked by his casket and saw. Jet magazine and other black publications took photographs. Jet Magazine's photograph of Emmett Till will go down in history as they documented the horror of what had taken place. Mamie Till deeply believed she wanted the world to see the ravages of racism, the brutality of bigotry. And so those pictures were published. And I really do think that if we saw the images of war today, whether we're talking about what happened in Gaza, the number right now is at 41,000 dead, but it's surely far, far higher casualty figures. Now what's happening in Lebanon just in the last days, 1,000 people killed, and Israel is promising now more strikes, and we will see if there is a full ground invasion. The Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, knows full well, growing up in Philadelphia, the power of the media, and has banned all international journalists from being in Gaza, and then through Al Jazeera out of Israel. Now, they say every time they report from Amman and outside of Israel, each time they say, we have been banned from reporting in Israel. What we need the global media to say, and our media in this country, is every time they cover Gaza, we are not allowed in Gaza. And that is critical so that you understand the fact that you are not seeing the images of the horror on the ground. Also, when it comes to this conflict, how irresponsible it is of the U.S. media, since it is the number one supporter of the Israeli military, to repeatedly bring you the voices. When was the last time you saw a Palestinian or Palestinian American interviewed on a U.S. network? Think about it. You might not. Or an Israeli Jewish peace activist. These points of view are so critical. And going back to that point, they are not a fringe minority or even a silent majority. It's our job to go to where the silence is. And often it is not silent. It is raucous. It is loud. People are organizing. People are speaking. But it doesn't hit the corporate media radar screen. We've got to break the sound barrier. And I think you guys are the best example of the potential of that. Giving voice to the people in your communities. I mean, we are a global community. We have to understand each other, or we will all go down separately. I was just looking at the demographics of New Jersey. I think in 1970, it was like more than 90% white. 1970. Okay, half a century later, 2020, it's like 55% white. So in a few years, it's going to be majority, minority. You won't be able to say minority anymore because it is the majority. And the only way we're going to survive is if we understand each other. And that is the role of the media. It's the place we can have those conversations, debate the strategies about how we survive together. And so I would love to hear from you in this presidential season. We're down to, just over 30 days. But being the most powerful country on earth, what people are saying, thinking, feeling in your communities matters all over the world. Years ago, we had just finished a segment with a woman from Guyana, and she was sitting at WBAI, and she was with something called the Red Thread Collective. And at the end of the conversation, I said, thanks so much. We go to the music break, and that's when we clear out our guests and bring in the new guests, and she wouldn't get up. And I said, excuse me, we're moving on to the U.S. election, so if you wouldn't mind. And she said, no, I'll be a guest on that segment. And I said, but why? You're from Guyana. And she said, I believe everyone in the world should get to vote for president of the United States. I mean, that shows the power. That is why, at this point, there is all media is global, even with your hyper local media that you have here. Since you're online, you're global. And I would not say you're just speaking to a small community. And that's why I think we are all in this together. The beauty is the diversity of voices. And I'd love to hear what you feel are the critical issues that are left out of the conversation and what people are most concerned about in your communities at every level. Um, this is the moment that it really matters as we move into this election.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, and then Linda can introduce herself.
Hi, Linda McDonald Carter.
Because I wanted to steal.
A legacy Newark person, been here like a long time, not going anywhere. They have to carry me out of the city. Anyway, just real quick, what I'm hearing, particularly for people 55 and younger in Black communities, is that inflation. And to hear it from 15, 14-year-olds, I didn't even know the word inflation. And 14 and 15-year-olds, inflation, like, you know what that is? Yes, they know what it is. And the second thing is they're concerned about the candidates. Unfortunately, a lot of them are looking at Trump and they're giving him more attention than they did the last time around for reasons, a host of reasons, but that's what I'm hearing.
Keep it up.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. He appeals to them for whatever reason. I noticed this whole thing around the world with the strong man and a need for somebody to come in and save people, and he seems to fit that based on what I'm hearing from them. So anyway, that's what I'm hearing on the ground. Inflation from 14-year-olds. Did you want to say something, Lucy? Oh, you're a co-founder. Yeah, but you speak about it. It is always we do this.
Right.
I wanted to eat something too.
So Lynn is also a co-founder on we think of ourselves as part of a global media ecosystem. I would encourage everyone to check it out. We recently hosted a town hall with Gen Z, contextualizing sort of contemporary political landscape. So we had about 7. One was a high schooler. The others, half were undergrads, and the other half were postgrads. And for them, this is a pretty important election. So they're talking about ways in which we view Gen Z as a commodity, what their priorities are from climate change to Project 2025. And we also talked about, there were a couple who talked about voting third party. We actually have one of our journalists who just submitted a piece on why she's voting third party. She is 18, she's a Brandeis, she's Jewish. She wrote a stunning piece on what it is to be Jewish and not in my name. A stunning op-ed. And she's doing a piece on why she's going to vote for PSL. So I think I certainly think hyper local news organizations, as you talked about, are part of a global news system for us. We interviewed the president, the prime minister of Singapore when Hurricane Charles hit. We've also done a national piece on what's happening to Black journalists in newsrooms. So we're doing sort of a variety of things, but I think this election we're hearing from Gen Z, and look what post town hall with the very same set of Gen Z folks, and Jared Ball will be moderator again.
And they can access the information. It's available. Anyone else while she's eating?
No.
Question, then a question.
I'm thankfully not the youngest person in the room, which is a pleasant surprise. But I am a millennial, and a lot of my circle of friends, we're wondering about how we're going to get generational wealth or buy a house, because not a lot of us still live at home in this economy, so close to New York City and Philadelphia. we are like, we want to be homeowners, not renters our whole life. And then I actually did watch a Young Turk video about housing developments and how the reason they're slowing down the building homes is because they can get better bang for their buck. They could build all these homes, affordable homes, right? Not just rental units, but affordable homes. So that's exciting. That's something we're talking about. I'm also on the homelessness board for Monarch Housing. It's part of the DCA. So I want to end homelessness as well.
Yeah, you're so right about that. I still development 6 or 7 years ago when 6 or 7 years ago when you saw the sort of beginning of that steady explosion of housing development. And Tony Gibbons is one of those developers. He actually did the walkouts, and I said, so Tony, you're building, but there are no amenities. And he said, Jason, I said, they're not. But to look critically at Newark. And I said, why aren't you building co-ops and condos? He said, it's too tight a price point. Now they don't have to bankroll those buildings because of tax abatements. So they're going to build affordable housing because that's where the tax dollars will offset their costs. They're not going to, it's costly to build home ownership and sell it, particularly for the tax base in Newark. You can't. It's out of there. I'm a housing person.
I would just add that there are LLCs buying up houses throughout the country. And that's having to understand there's a nationwide tenant strike going on, trying to get the federal government to pay attention to the fact that these LLCs are buying up all the property. It reminds me of the company towns. If you don't agree and cooperate with them, you're out. You're homeless. I mean, I grew up in public housing when you paid 25% of whatever your income was. I know people think folks took advantage. No, they didn't. They didn't take advantage of it. We were responsible when we moved in. Before we moved in, they came to see how our parents were raising us and how clean we were before we could move into public housing. And everyone was charged with making sure that the building and not the common areas, but the rest of it stayed clean. So people's perception of public housing has something to do with why we don't have public housing. Because low income housing, affordable housing is not public housing. And public housing, from my understanding, started with young men coming back from World War II and Korea to ensure that they had housing because there was a housing shortage. And then you have people of color moving in over time. So going back to the media and the press, I'm about press and media. When you talk about it, the information, just in terms of the term, and we talked about this earlier today, the language we use, public housing, bad. But people don't know the history of public housing. We say it was for veterans. That's a whole different. It feels different. It was for veterans. Mm-hmm. That's not happening today for veterans. So anyway, other people have things to say.
Critical point.
I might put Mark and Brandon spot here because they're both working with John and his team at NBA Spotlight on stories about how different parts of New Jersey communities are thinking about the election. So do either of you want to start talking a little bit about what your stories are finding?
Sure. I'm reporting on how Indian women in particular are galvanized around Kamala Harris's presidency. I'm finding it to be a tricky story to write because, the South Asian community is quite divided on religious and national lines, but also even the women I'm interviewing are saying there's generational divides. So older Indian women are very excited that they might have a Desi president, which is a really big deal to them, of course. I don't think it's something any of us expected in our lifetime. But they're saying that a lot of young people in the community are really upset about Gaza and that they don't see Kamala really kind of differentiating herself from Biden in terms of that policy. So, when it comes down to the policies, it's like, I'm not sure that she's a candidate that can get people excited, even when her identity, is a way that you can kind of break a proverbial ceiling. The other thing with the community in New Jersey.
I just had another question. How do they feel about Usha Vance, also Indian American?
Right. I think that for people who already lean Republican, that is a nice point for them, right? They're like, oh, there's another South Asian on the ticket. The other thing I was going to say is that the New Jersey community is up and coming, rising middle class, and so taxes are really kind of, ultimately they vote with their pocketbooks and they're concerned about various fiscal issues. So it is a community that's pretty divided. There are Republicans in the community, and Mark, I guess that's a good transition to your story.
Well, thank you. My name is Mark Tyler. I'm actually doing a story on Black Republicans and why they have made the unpopular choice to be thought Black Republicans. Um, Initially, most people would think, well, if you're a Black person, you would normally and automatically just vote Democrat. Well, we've run into several Black people who have said, well, not so fast. When I went into the reporting, I initially expected, I don't know what exactly I expected, but I didn't get it. What I did find is that there are some Black Republicans who were disenchanted with the things that have happened in the Black community, and they've said in no uncertain terms, we've been voting Democratic for years, and our community is still in this shape. We can give something else a try. I've had one gentleman brought up Trump's Platinum Plan, and when you read it,
When you read it.
Trump's Platinum Plan, and when you read it, it looks very good. Has everything materialized? It has not, in my opinion, my humble opinion. But there are people who are making unpopular decisions, but they're not unintelligent people, and they're not uninformed.
You know, Mark, I'm curious, because we ran into this with our Gen Z folks. We ran into this with our Gen Z folks, right? They're upset about Gaza. They're upset about the Congo. They want to raise the issue of all of these things, right? And they're also of a particular class. Those who participated in town hall are of a particular class. They're upper middle class.
Yeah.
So they're having a different conversation because they come with sort of these ideas about who they are in the world, and the propaganda that goes along with that. It was interesting that they were concerned about Harris's position on building the most lethal military, but yet they defaulted that we're going to have to vote for her. And what's interesting is that I'm not seeing it on local coverage, right? So my question back to them was, well, where's Claudia de la Cruz? Where's Jill Stein? And where's Cornel West in your thinking about the presidential elections? So I don't think that we're doing a good job presenting those options, because when we're having the conversations or the interviews, we're like, is it Trump or is it Harris? We're not presenting different options, and we're relegating the uncommitted just to the Palestinian community, just to the Muslim community. And I think we're doing a disservice to our community, and so we're challenging ourselves. Like, how are you thinking about this? Like, what's the because we're working on a piece on third parties, right? So we have our first piece in from an 18-year-old who's voting third party. So I'm curious as to when you say, well, we're concerned about Harris, like, are you thinking about third party options? That's what I would be curious to hear from your group about that. Sorry.
I think the concern that some of the people have who I've spoken with is the ability of third parties to win. And no, but hear me out. They've said, well, look, we don't know that the third party can win, but if the Republican comes in, I have one gentleman who says, well, I go to MAGA rallies and people actually listen to me. They don't always agree, but they listen. So it seems that they believe that they can influence the winner more so than influence the winner if the winner is a Democrat. So I thought that was very, very interesting in my reporting.
Clay Bell from Reporting Hispano also has a story that's going to publish soon. John Mooney just went to the men's room, but I think it's going to publish tomorrow, that he did in a partnership with Spotlight. So tell us about what you found.
Well, I prefer to do a question to Annie.
I have a question.
Yeah. So, Annie, you start to talk saying that it's important to allow the people speaking for themselves, you refer the anecdote for the 50s about the radio that was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan. Today, we have the internet, we have the social media, everybody can talk, everybody can say, but we say right now, I think, in my opinion, there's so much misinformation, so much noise, everybody can say whatever they wanted through the social media, look like everybody had that platform to speak. So how we combat this misinformation? Because the silent majority and can arguing with you that people have the social media is not silent majority because they can speak to the media. So but right now, I think we are there's so much misinformation that people know less than in the past, in my opinion.
That's a great question. And manipulation of information. I think you have to become a trusted news source. Yes, anyone can speak, but people turn to places they trust. Democracy Now! Started in 1996 as the only daily election show in public broadcasting. We were only going to go for 9 months. It was just on radio. And then the day after, when we were I think that was the year that Clinton was reelected, we were just about packing up and people said, no, we want this to continue, radio stations at the time. Because of that emphasis on hearing people's voices at the grassroots, that we just use the election as a way. I actually was in Haiti at the time, and Pacifica wanted to start Democracy Now! And they asked if I would be the host, and I thought, wow, here in Haiti, people get gunned down when they announce for office or when they go to the polls, but the vast majority of people voted. And yet in the United States, most people didn't vote. And I thought, and we didn't face anything like the odds here. I thought, well, the elections and the primary system is a way to go from state to state and look at what people are interested in. I never believed it was apathy, why people didn't vote, but that what they were involved in. And I think that authenticity of people's voices, it just began to grow. We haven't even talked about the criminal justice system and the criminal injustice system, but the following year in 1997, NPR was going to air a series of commentaries by Mumia Abu-Jamal, right? He was on death row at the time in Pennsylvania. And they were getting a lot of attention for this, and I thought it was a great idea. I wish we had come up with it. And then the Fraternal Order of Police started to put pressure on them. And so they immediately locked, even though their editor said perhaps this was the best commentaries they'd ever heard on any issue. Mumia didn't talk about his own case. He talked about things like, one column was about father hunger, about how so many young black men in jail did not even know their fathers. Or he talked about capital punishment was punishment for those without capital. So it was things like that. But they locked the commentaries away in a vault, and then we said, oh my God, we have to do this now. It's like our responsibility. We asked them if we could run the commentaries. No. So we worked with the Prison Radio Project, and they went in and recorded more commentaries, and we began to run them. It got a lot of attention at the time as we were leading up to the first commentary. Different news organizations like the Society for Professional Journalists and others were backing us, saying this is our job. We're not there to win a popularity contest. We have a responsibility in a criminal justice discussion to also include those behind the bars. And if we're going to talk about the death penalty, rare in the industrialized world, people don't realize that in the United States, how rare it is. But it's here in this country. We have the job to go behind the bars, to people on death row. So we started the first commentary, playing it, and the radio network in Pennsylvania that ran Democracy Now! Was affiliated with Temple University. It was called Jazz FM. And they immediately dropped us. And they said that their listeners wanted to hear more jazz. Now, I was very insulted because I myself am a jazz aficionado. And I said there was this sudden desire at that moment on that day to drop us and play more jazz. And they had a problem because their folio had already been sent out, their monthly guide, and it said Democracy Now! Was the most popular show on their radio station, and they saw it as a model for their local shows. So then how was it dropped? Then it became clear because one of the deans of the law school said it wasn't appropriate to hear Mumia Abu-Jamal's voice. Said, really, you can have your views on whether he was guilty or innocent, had a fair trial or didn't, but to say that you cannot even hear his voice, this is a very big problem. And as I said before, it's our job to go to where the silence is. So we insisted on playing it. I mean, there were protests at Temple, then the law school had a big forum inviting us to talk about this. And then the show just took off. Station after station all over the country started asking if they could run Democracy Now! First it was on Pacifica Radio, then on college and community stations, then on NPR stations, and then the week of September 11th, 2001, of the terror attacks in New York and Washington, we were broadcasting from downtown community television, an old firehouse on Lafayette Street below Canal. We broadcast every morning. The second plane hit the second tower of the World Trade Center right after we started broadcasting. We were the closest national broadcast to Ground Zero. And the local public access station, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, had a link into the firehouse, which was a community media center. They said, we want to run Democracy Now! As emergency broadcasting. And the minute they started, stations all over the country, TV stations, started to say, can we run Democracy Now! And then that was the time of video cassettes. And soon the FedEx or UPS guys were picking up hundreds of video cassettes for us. And I felt it was important to be overnight delivery because it was breaking news. And then the radio station in town would say, well, the TV station is playing it, we would like to. And so now we're on 1,500 stations around the world. That is all to say when you talk about, but I think it goes to the issue of challenging disinformation. Because we don't just have those typical pundits on. We have people closest to the story. And it's that voice of authenticity that challenges the garbage out there. And you have to be there every day. And people then come to trust you. And then part of our job is not only to present the story accurately. The hardest part of my job is watching the networks. Because the amount of misinformation even there. But more importantly, to understand how the rest of the country understands the news. You have to watch how it's presented. You have to meet people where they are and then bring in other voices to talk about what's really happening on the ground. And then it's just building that trust. You can't stop all of them from spewing lies, but you can have a news outlet that people turn to that they can trust. That's the best, I think, that we can do. And also we can deconstruct some of that, challenge that. Yes.
Oops.
Did you want to say something?
No, I'm Moshin has a question.
Please,
Go ahead.
go first.
As the November 5th elections are approaching, Muslim American community is very concerned what's going on in Gaza and now in Lebanon. They are confused and double-minded too, and it is very hard for them to find a difference between Democrats and Republicans' approach when it comes to how Benjamin Netanyahu regime is dealing with the situation in Gaza and in Lebanon. So they're very confused, and the situation is getting worse day by day, day by day. I think by the time election comes, the community will remain unconfused, double-minded, and I don't know. So what do you think? Do you find any difference between the approach of Democrats and Republicans? How Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is dealing situation in Gaza and now in Lebanon?
I'll hand it back over to your runner.
What's that?
Oh, I'm just
you're
tossing it back.
I think it's not up to us to say that, but it's up to us to challenge those in power on what their positions are. I can only say that when we were in Chicago at the Democratic Convention, and we were also covering the uncommitted movement, it was very interesting. There were something like 300 people of the delegates who were for a ceasefire. There were a number of uncommitted delegates. The Minnesota delegation, it had something like 11 uncommitted delegates. Minnesota is important because that's Tim Walz.
Right.
When he was first chosen as the VP candidate, we had on Asma Mohammed, who was the head of uncommitted in Minnesota, and she said he had said to her that the uncommitted delegates have an important voice, they must be heard. When they put up, each of them held up the name of a dead person in Gaza, a person who'd been killed in an Israeli strike. And then the delegation, they all had their regular signs. That day they had USA, so they kept covering their signs with USA signs. I had a very unusual experience where I was covering the Florida delegation. And a Florida delegate, a Connecticut delegate, and a Michigan delegate held up a sign a banner that said, "Stop arming Israel." Immediately, one of the main people from the Florida delegation started giving out more "I love Biden" signs. They were sort of very thin, long, "I heart Joe." That's what it was, "I heart Joe." And they put out, they held them up, many of these signs. Each person got like 4 signs so they could cover the banner. And then they were pushing people down with the banner. And I was trying to get photographs of that banner. And someone in the delegation started to hit me with the "I love Joe" signs. And she was hitting me as I was taking video because they were trying to cover up these signs. And then as she was hitting me, she realized who I was, and she's holding up, and she's hitting me with the "I love Joe" sign, and she said, "I love you, I love you." That isn't really funny given the situation as it is. We then we had the people on who unfurled that banner, and the best we can do is hear the voices on the ground, because any time the issue of a ceasefire in Gaza was raised, which was rarely, they did not allow a Palestinian-American voice on the stage, even though that was a demand of the uncommitted, and they slept overnight outside the convention center making that demand. They did have a couple whose son has since died in Gaza, Hirsch Goldberg Poland. And his parents were there. He wasn't dead yet. And they pleaded to have the hostages released. And then Hirsch's dad, the father of the couple, really, I think, most poignantly of anyone on the stage, talked about ending the anguish in Palestine, the anguish of the Palestinians. It was quite something. But every time that issue was raised, which was very rare from the stage, including Kamala Harris did refer to it, the applause was deafening. More than any other issue. It was remarkable to see And that's the voices on the ground. And it showed to the Democrats what their base, what the people in that room, the thousands of people wanted. And I think it's our job to go there and to provide a forum for people to speak for themselves. And that's how decisions get made.
I have a question of you, Amy.
We got one over here first.
Okay, here.
John, and then we'll go to you. John, wait, where'd he go? All right, you're up. Sorry.
Just really quickly, I'm of the school that there's Edward Bernays Media, who's for those who don't know, who's really the father of modern propaganda. And then you have the press, which is the whole purpose, there's no term in the First Amendment that says media. It says press. And I brought this to you before because I always thought as you as an educator, and that your role as a press is to educate the public so that they are informed, even if it's from people on the grassroots. So do you see a difference between media and press? Because I've always told you, I thought you were operating in the press part.
I think it's referred, these days, it's interchangeable, but it's just critical to understand the role that we play, the sacred responsibility we have to provide that forum for people to hash out these ideas, and not brought to you by corporations that profit from war when we're talking about war and peace, not brought to you by the oil, the gas, the coal, the nuclear companies when we're talking about climate change, not brought to you by the banks and the financial institutions when we're talking about inequality, but brought to people by journalists and artists deeply committed to hearing the truth.
I'll just say one thing real quick, because that's a perfect segue into what my question was. A lot of the folks in this room are already operating under the pressure, the financial pressures and the revenue associations with that. And I don't know how much over your long and storied career you've been involved with the revenue side or the donations and support side of Democracy Now! And other outlets. But oftentimes the folks, especially the folks in this room, are struggling for the scraps of what are already scraps in the mainstream and white media. And so oftentimes when we talk about being supported, not being supported by corporations, there's a little bit of pullback because what money are they supposed to get in that case? And oftentimes it feels like, hey, I understand that these folks are part of a system that is contributing to the very problems that we're trying to solve, but if I don't have any money to pay my staff, or if I don't have any money to keep the lights on, then there will be no independent media in that sense. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the tension or the balance between trying to make sure your operation continues and your community can still be served, while also being cognizant of the influence of corporate and commercial media or money.
Democracy Now! Started 28 years ago. We didn't know if we'd be able to make it, a few months in, let alone 28 years later. And when the networks were using satellites to, send around their radio shows, their television shows, we couldn't possibly afford that. So we used the internet. And we were sending around our radio show before the word podcast. And then when we also became a television show, and we were broadcasting, we had reporters in Iraq and other places, we pioneered this way to send video through the internet. And, a 10-minute piece would be 100 emails that would go through a kind of screen, and then we would put it together in New York, and even the companies that were making these programs were saying, how are you doing this? Or when we were in East Timor, the day that East Timor became the, Democratic Republic of East Timor, we were taking our video broadcasts in 2002. We were going to the airport, and they were on DVDs, and we would say, doing exactly the opposite of what they say, never, you're never to take something from someone you don't know, whether they were nuns or soldiers or artists, whoever, when they were leaving East Timor, which had almost no internet ability, we would send it to a Urdu company in Darwin, Australia. The guy would pick it up at the airport, and he had a little internet cafe, and he would send it to New York, and there would be Shanana Bushmao flying through to our New York studio. And we did these hour broadcasts. So that took a lot of ingenuity, but that's all to say we were on the internet from the beginning because it was free and we needed to use it. Necessity is the mother of invention. So when we did our show every day, we didn't want to we wanted the information to make its way to the White House, to have reporters at the Pentagon challenging those, and we would put up what is now a podcast, and a person in Germany, in Australia, in Nigeria, and in Mexico would take a portion of that hour and transcribe it, and within an hour or two, we'd have the entire show transcribed. And we would post it so people could read it, and then they could bring the questions to the powers that be. When Time Magazine made their first website, I think it cost something like $20 million, and they put up a paywall. Of course, that's the last thing we did. We always said, steal this story, please. And we called someone at Fox, someone who was doing video there or whatever. We said, we'd like you to take a look at our website. They said, are you kidding? All the networks are watching you guys. But what that meant was that we were a global platform from the beginning. So that when we fundraise all over the world. And it's not corporations, it's individuals giving what they can, $5 or $5 a month.
Myself included.
Yes, and that really matters. And that's the way, when people are hungry for that information, they pay what they can for it. And for those that can't afford to pay, hopefully someone else will.
Who else? Who is it? Jungwon, you back? Question.
Joe,
yeah.
Natty first, and then.
Okay,
Dawn.
cool.
Sorry, Dawn.
Hi, I'm Nelly. Hello. I just want to go back to the point of how certain communities are feeling about this election. In my case, what I've seen in the Venezuelan community is that while many of them cannot vote, they're feeling very anxious about what the candidate that's going to win is going to be, because there's this narrative that if a certain candidate wins, then is the humanitarian parole system going to be revoked. And so I think if Trump wins, there is this narrative that certain programs are going to be revoked.
Right.
Like the humanitarian parole. So it's that system where people can bring their families on a terms of sponsorship. Yes. So for Venezuelans, we have the ones who have the political asylum, then we have the TPS, which is a protected status, and then we have a parole system, which allows people to bring their families over if they're already here. And then we have those who have entered on irregular terms, and so they have like an undefined status. So then we have these four groups, and people just keep asking. I hear it in my community, it's like, if this person wins, are we just gonna have to leave? And I think it just goes back to the topic of, even if there are people who cannot vote, who don't participate in the same election, they are gonna be affected. And I do have a question, because I am a Gen Z journalist, so I haven't lived enough to see history in the US like you guys. But I do wanna know if, in previous elections, this anti-immigration sentiment has always been the topic of contention. Yes, and then we have these communities, Venezuelans, they speak Spanish, many of them don't speak English, and whether we are covering, they don't get access to it. So yeah.
First of all, that's a very important question. Well, a couple things. One is history. and it's always, embedding a story or an issue in bringing the history into it, and especially for the younger generation, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is, what has been in the past. This is how people organized, and that gives people some kind of context. I am curious, in the Venezuelan diaspora or immigrant community here, is the sentiment more, who is the sentiment more for?
I think it's divided because of the history of our country. So people very much fear like left-leaning ideas or like socialism. They also didn't have a healthy relationship with the media because of the censorship that there was in Venezuela. So there's that part that they lean right, but they also feel anxious about the fact that the right doesn't like the immigration or like the part of
Right.
coming here. And
That's like, I'll say, I'm gonna give an example. In the Republican convention in Milwaukee, when Vance spoke and his wife Usha spoke, his wife Usha, whose parents are from India, she was speaking, and they had their regular signs that they would hold up, and it was mass deportation now. And then when J.D. Vance spoke, and also Usha, talked about her mother teaching J.D. how to cook Hindu vegetarian. Now, all the rest of the time, the cheers for everyone on the stage, from Hulk Hogan to Tucker Carlson, were deafening. When they talked about J.D. Vance learning how to cook Hindu vegetarian food, it was silent, and you could just see the mass deportation now. So the conflicting feelings, and I understand what you're talking about in the Venezuelan community. I think we just have to hear, also, people don't agree with each other, and we have to have that kind of debate. And not assume it's always a right-left debate. Like in the progressive community, there are serious debates, and we try to provide a space for them. But you raised many important questions.
There's one right there.
We do have a hard out at 2 p.m. So we'll make sure that we wrap up at a reasonable time. Who's next?
Well,
Oh, hey, I'm over here. Go ahead.
I'm going back to the I'm going back to the Israel-Gaza situation. So it seems unlikely that Vice President Harris will change her position to suit, or to make the pro-Palestine voters happy or satisfied with their answer. So should she not change her position? Should those pro-Palestine voters essentially vote for Trump by not voting for Harris? And are we going to be better off under a President Trump when it comes to the Gaza-Israel problem?
Well, I don't think Trump's saying he offers a more pro-Palestinian point of view. It's really interesting what's going on here. You have the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, who is very close to Trump, and the Prime Minister himself faces charges around corruption. You have the former President of the United States, Trump, who faces a number of federal and state charges, has also been convicted of 34 felonies. And in both cases, you have both the Prime Minister and the President. If they can maintain those positions, they avoid prison. Presidency and Prime Ministership versus prison. And that's very serious. If Netanyahu can hold out and help to create the conditions for a Trump win, they save each other from prison, perhaps. So there is a lot of self-interest here. And as for the position Kamala Harris takes, and also as part of the Biden administration, I mean, I'm reading right now, I don't know who is reading their own news headlines, but the breaking news now is extremely serious. Israel's military says Iran has launched missiles at Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we talked to a number of Israeli Jewish commentators who have warned about Netanyahu desperately wanting to include Iran in this, which could lead to a regional war. The U.S. has 50,000 troops in the region, in the Gulf, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Jordan. This is a very, very serious, ominous time. Iran is very aware that Netanyahu wants Iran to get involved. And Israel, has hit Tehran, has hit Beirut, has hit Syria, is continually hitting Gaza. What the U.S. does matters enormously. And we're just going to have to keep on broadcasting the voices of people who are deeply concerned about this, and also those in power and the decisions they're making. No decision is final, and in election year it really matters that you project the voice of the bottom to the top, and not serve as a silo that prevents those on top from hearing what everyone is feeling. Again, in that Democratic National Convention hall, the applause for anyone who talked about Gaza was deafening.
Yeah, but I mean, what can the pro-Palestine voters do? I mean, if they don't vote, essentially they're voting for Trump.
I mean, people make their own decisions, and they're continually engaged in pressuring those in the administration, and that's how this system works, and that's how it works. And our job in the media is to reflect that, not ice out those points of view, which is really what the rest of the media does.
I think we have time for one more, because again, we do have a hard out at 2. I think you were next, Kimmy, right? If it's quick, we might be able to squeeze in one more. So,
Amy, I'd just like to say that I am a Jew. I am an Israeli citizen. I don't like Netanyahu, but I can tell you that since 15 years ago, I felt increasingly unsafe in the world physically for myself and my children because we are Jewish. And I think there's a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment. I'd love to talk to you about it at some point, yeah. But, right, like you spoke at length. I just made a commitment a couple of years ago that when people had a lot to say that seemed to demonize Jews, that I would speak up as a Jew, right? So that's I did my pro forma speak up. Sorry, I know it's not a popular opinion for many people, but I wanted to talk about the issues that are being discussed in my communities. Okay, housing insecurity, food insecurity, and lack of internet access. Okay, I have a friend in Parsippany who got involved. She's a Green Party candidate. I'm not. I'm a Dem. But I helped with her election or campaign because she's a friend and I believed in her issues. She got involved as a Board of Ed candidate because her granddaughter wasn't being treated fairly in high school. There were a lot of other issues. They were being marginalized because they're Hispanic, right? So she ran her whole campaign from her phone because she didn't have broadband internet access that was, and a device, a good computer, right, to access the internet, right? So this is one of the big democracy issues of our time. People need access to broadband everywhere. There are buildings in Newark that are not wired for broadband. You can't get it there.
Question.
Well, no, these are things that she said she wanted to know. What are the concerns in my community? These are the concerns. Okay, final thing. I was very alarmed when I spoke to a friend in Georgia this morning that's been very hard hit, she and her community, by the hurricane. She was telling me that FEMA hasn't declared her area to be a disaster zone, which it was declared before the hurricane, okay? That Trump is trying to bring resources and broadband or satellite internet to the area, and they're waiting for him. I said, look, don't wait, file claims. So the government knows, yes. So I filed claims with FEMA so the government knows, and there's a regional partnership, hybrid partnership with the Georgia government, so that the government knows where are the areas hardest hit, where do they need to bring resources, okay? Don't wait for anybody. And she said, no. She said, we have to wait for him because he's the only one doing anything.
Thank you.
I just want to say I appreciate what you're saying, and on the issue of anti-Semitism, it is a very real issue. My grandfather is an Orthodox rabbi. My great-great-great-grandfather is a founder of Hasidism. I'm very aware of that and have been steeped in that growing up. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, these are very real concerns. But as you know, and I assume you feel the same way, being critical of the Prime Minister of Israel, being critical of what the Israeli military is doing, to say the least, is not anti-Semitic. In fact, many Jews feel, and think of all the protests and encampments all over the country. It may be that the majority of those arrested were Jewish students, and they are not anti-Semitic. They are deeply concerned about what the Israeli military is doing, and it's really important we separate those two things. And on internet, I mean, it is such a serious issue. The U.S. is so backward when it comes to having, broadband access and how important and democratizing that is. On Democracy Now!, we often interview people on Skype or on Zoom all over the world. And there's this joke. I mean, the further away they are, in the most remote area in the world, the better their internet is. And it definitely trumps anything in Brooklyn. We have a joke that it's so much poorer in so many areas of this country, the access to the internet, than it is around the world. And it's the difference of having a subsidized internet. It's just a means of communication. And it's a very real issue. I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm going to go to Ola real quick. I don't think we have time for a full response. I think Amy addressed that. But let's keep it short, folks.
Thank you
2 p.m.
for this opportunity. So, as I mentioned, I represent the Polish community, and building on what Nelly started, the topic of how the ethnic community looks at both candidates and what we expect from them. One of the leading issues in our community is the war in Ukraine and what security for Ukraine borders Poland. So, and we've sort of participated in the whole crisis by opening the borders to millions of Ukrainians. About 2 million moved to Poland after the beginning of the war. So the Polish Americans living here, a lot of immigrants from Poland, they still have families in Poland. And they're watching very carefully what's happening there, and they're also watching the U.S. elections in terms of what a given candidate what kind of security the
And
candidate.
what do they feel?
So the Polish community is divided, just like the U.S. Nation is divided. The Democrats believe in Kamala Harris. They believe that she will stand up to Putin. She will continue the U.S. policy towards Putin by sending in help to Ukraine and supporting Ukraine in this war. However, the Republican part of the community, they strongly believe in what Trump says, that he'll end the war. How he's going to end the war, nobody knows. They don't know this answer. Although I just finished an article on that. And one of he's actually the president of the Polish American Congress in New Jersey. He had a very interesting theory that the war in Ukraine cannot go on forever. There's going to be an end of aid because like nobody has enough money to support Ukraine, so it's going to have to end at some point through negotiations and through giving up part of Ukraine to Russia. And in his opinion, it is a good solution for Poland because it will keep Russia at bay for a while. I mean, I guess he didn't mention for a while. He thought it would be a permanent solution, as opposed to Ukraine being defeated in the war and Russia bordering Poland along the entire border. But that was his person. He has like a lot of deep thoughts on that.
And who does he support?
Well, he supports Trump. He's very conservative. A lot of immigrants from Poland are extremely conservative. I would say 80% of them. So they're rooting for Trump. However, the Polish Americans, people who already were born here in the U.S., they constitute a majority of Polish Americans, like 9 million people living in the U.S. They're equally, I would say, divided between the both parties. But the immigrants are more conservative for many reasons, because primarily because they escaped communism. And a lot of them had to leave Poland because of communism. So for them, the left-leaning party sort of equals or is similar to communism. So and it's hard for them to overcome this barrier. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I really hate to wrap this so much, but Don Pepe is going to give us a Don Bill if we don't get out of here on time. Thank you, Amy, so much. Thank you, everybody who came here. This is wonderful. We have some Go boxes, some Go containers if you want to take anything home.